Hello everybody, my name is Eric D. Johnson, also known as BrightShine. I live in the city of Memphis, state of Tennessee, in the county Sheriff. And today's date is January the 5th, 2015. It is early Monday morning, and the time is 12:30 a.m. And I want to first say thank you all my fans, my support, for your continued encouragement and support. And as I always keep my fans, my supporters informed, I'll continue to keep myself employed at a company here in the city of Memphis, state of Tennessee, in the county Sheriff. Mayor Pride right there on the corner of Vance Avenue and Walnut Street. And I'll continue to further my education at Monroe College Online, pursuing my associate degree with, in business administration with a concentration in marketing. And I always keep my fans, my supporters informed that, as you know, my entertainment, my musical interest, I'll continue to make sure that One Sound Studio, where I've been recording my music, and as you know, back in 2014, I went to purchase some music. Then, a few months back in May 2014, then back here in at the end of October 2014, I went back to One Sound Studio, recorded, and supposed to have my pictures taken, and supposed to have a video shot of me in the booth. And then One Sound Studio took it upon themselves because they didn't give me a receipt when I gave them the money for those services. They call themselves gonna take the money and run. Well, I contacted my attorney, and we'll be pursuing legal action against One Sound Studio. And I was referred by One Sound Studio to this some guy that do music videos, some dude named Luga and Wicked Films, and supposed to did my music video, and I don't even have my music video, so I contacted my attorney about that. So I'm gonna pursue legal action against that person as well. So it's, nobody's getting away with stealing no money from BrightShine. And but on today's video, we're gonna continue where we left off yesterday. We're gonna continue to talk about first. We're gonna continue to talk about traditional African traditional religion, West African traditional religion, and we're gonna continue to make sure we make the determination of the people who are of Niger Congo ancestry, descendancy, whose ancestor Niger Congo, and because of the slave trade on the East African coast and on the West African coast, you have all these people whose ancestors were Niger Congo, who were West African, who were Bantu, living outside of the continent of Africa, and they living in, because of the East African slave trade, living in the South Arabian Peninsula, living in West Asia, living in Central Asia, living in South Asia, living even in East Asia. And because of the West African slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade, you have all these people who are living in the Western Hemisphere, North America, which is Canada and the United States, and Mexico, and you have Central America and South America, and you have the Caribbean islands, and all these people that are of Niger Congo descendancy, whose ancestors were Niger Congo, who were West African, who were Bantu, are living here in the Western Hemisphere. We have to make that determination that, like myself, West African, and people who are living in Hispaniola, like Haiti and Dominican Republic, and the Caribbean islands, Central America, South America, which is Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, Panama, Guyana, Belize, uh, all these places, Bantu descendancy. So we had to make that determination. We had to continue to stress and emphasize uh, the fact that people are of West African uh, ancestry. People are of Bantu ancestry. So right now we're finna get into that. We're finna go back to the but first what I want to make sure on this video that we start out with is that uh, the National Open University of Nigeria has online courseware, and when we talk about African traditional religion and West African traditional religion, they teach African traditional religion, West African traditional religion, and they have these courses and these online courses about religion, and that's what we're going to start with today. I forgot to put when I looked it up. I forgot to put online courseware. But see, when you be on the National Open University of Nigeria online courseware, you got like Introduction to the Study of Religion, CTA 003, Introduction to Philosophy, CTA 009, Philosophy of Religion, CTA 043, Introduction to Linguistics 1 and Introduction to Linguistics 2. It's LIN 111 and LIN 112. Then you have Introduction to Sociology, CSS 111. Introduction to Psychology, CSS 121. Then you have Introduction to Philosophy, CTH 131. Introduction to African Traditional Religion, CTH 192. Introduction to the Study of Religion, CTH 173. Religion and Society, CTH 151. you got philosophy of religion, CTH 233. Introduction to Sociology 1, NSS 217. They have Sociology of Religion, CTH 352. I got Introduction to Semantics, ENG 331. Introduction to Applied Linguistics, ENG 351. Introduction to Sociolinguistics, ENG 355. Introduction to World Religions, ISL 313. African Traditional Religion and Culture, CTA 491. They have right. Okay, that's one on two. Psycholinguistics, ENG 491. Theology of African Traditional Religion, CTA 792. And there's some very important, there's some very important information on this website. It's the National Open University of Nigeria online courseware. Anybody interested in going to school, furthering their education, get in contact with the National Open University of Nigeria because they have online courseware and you could possibly take these courses online. You'll never find out if you don't never seek information. Now let's go to, we're going to our languages. We'll start with the Afro-Asiatic language. other Afro-Asiatic languages are the Semitic, Omotic, Egyptian, Cushitic, Chadic, and Berber. Those are the Afro-Asiatic languages. We're going to go to the Semitic first. And the Semitic languages are Arabic, Amharic, Hebrew, Tigrinya, and Aramaic. We're going to the Hebrew. All right, the Canaanite language are a subfamily of the Semitic languages spoken by the Canaanites, the Israelites, and the Phoenicians. Now, Phoenician is extinct, and a dialect of the Phoenician is Punic, is extinct. And the Hebrew, Ammonite is extinct, Moabite extinct, Edomite extinct, Biblical Hebrew is extinct, Tiberian Hebrew, Yemenite Hebrew, Sephardic Hebrew, Ashkenazi Hebrew, Mishnaic Hebrew, Medieval Hebrew, Hexcali Hebrew, Modern Hebrew, Israeli Hebrew, Ancient Samaritan Hebrew, and Samaritan Hebrew. The Arabic is an Afro-Asiatic language. It's a Semitic language. Arabic languages are Central Semitic languages. Said that Arabic usually designates one of three main variants: Classical Arabic, Modern Standard Arabic, and Colloquial Dialectical Arabic. Amharic is a Semitic language spoken in Ethiopia. It is the second most spoken Semitic language in the world after Arabic, and the only official working language of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. And we already talked about how former emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie I, they call him Rastafari, and how back in the 1960s during the Pan-African, exploration, he made a visit to Jamaica, and the Jamaican people started these Amharic study circles and things of this nature, and with the Amharic language and everything. But the Amharic is an Ethiopian language, and that's a Semitic language. It's Afro-Asiatic. Okay. Tigrinya is an Afro-Asiatic language belonging to the family Semitic branch. It says here, Tigrinya was one of Eritrea's official language during their short-lived federation with Ethiopia. In 1950, it was placed with the Southern Ethiopian language Amharic prior to its annexation. Upon Eritrea's independence in 1991, Tigrinya retained its standard working language in the country, the only state in the world to date to hold Tigrinya recognition on a national level. That's Tigrinya. And Aramaic is a family of language or dialect belonging to the Semitic family. The history of Aramaic broke down into three broad periods: Old Aramaic, Middle Aramaic, and Modern Aramaic. And all those languages are the Semitic language. The Omatic language are a branch of the Afro-Asiatic family spoken in southwest, western Ethiopia. Now, the North and South Omatic branches are universally recognized. Egyptian is the oldest known language of Egypt and a branch of the Afro-Asiatic language family. Since scholars group the Egyptian language into 6 major chronological divisions: Archaic Egyptian language, Old Egyptian language, Middle Egyptian language, Late Egyptian language, Demotic Egyptian language, and Coptic Egyptian language. The Cushitic language are a branch of the Afro-Asiatic language family, spoken primarily in the Horn of Africa, Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Ethiopia, as well as the Nile Valley, Sudan, and Egypt, and parts of the African Great Lakes, being Tanzania and Kenya. So the Cushitic languages are usually considered to include the following branches: the Baya, North Cushitic, Central Cushitic, Aga, Highland East Cushitic, Sidamic, Lowland East Cushitic, Dale, and South Cushitic. The Chadic language are a branch of the Afro-Asiatic language family, spoken in parts of the Sahel, across northern Nigeria, southern Niger, southern Chad, Central African Republic, and northern Cameroon. So the most widely spoken Chadic language is Hassay. Now, the branches, the West Chadic, 2 branches: A, the Hassay, Ron, Boli, and Angus language, and B, the Badi, Wajan, and Zara languages. B.U. Madare, Central Chadic, 3 branches would include the A, the Bure, Kanvi, and Bete; B, the Badume and Musbu; C, Gidar. East Chadic, 2 branches would include A, the Tunak, Nansiri, and Kire; B, Dangliat, Mukulu, and Socorro, and Mese. The Berber languages or dialects are a family of similar and closely related language dialects indigenous to North Africa. Berber constitutes a branch of the Afro-Asiatic language family, and the 6 major varieties of Berber, with 2 million speakers. They are in order of demographic weight: Tashilhit, Kabyle, Atlas, the Mizite, Riffian, Shawi, and Tuareg. Those are your Afro-Asiatic languages. Right? Now we on Wikipedia for everybody that's listening. We are on Wikipedia. You know, we already know about the quick reference. We know about Wikipedia being used as a reference. So we on Wikipedia, or for some people, like when I use my laptop, be on Bing or any other search engine. But we on Wikipedia on my desktop. So now we're going to go to the Nilo-Saharan. The Nilo-Saharan. The Nilo-Saharan language are a proposed family of African language spoken by some 50 million people, mainly in the upper parts of the Chari and Nile rivers, including historic Nubia, north of where the 2 tributaries of Nile meet. It says the language extends through 17 nations in the northern half of Africa, from Algeria to Benin in the west, from Libya to the Democratic Republic of Congo in the center, and from Egypt to Tanzania in the east. The major languages within the Nilo-Saharan languages are the Luo, Dulo, language of the Luo, Kenya's third largest ethnic after the Niger Congo, Kikuyu, and Luye. Say Kanuri, Kanimbu, the Sanghe, including Zarme, the Tiso, the Nubian, Lubare, including Aringe, which is low Lubare, Kalenjin, including the dialects Nanda and Pokai. Lango is a Luo language. Dinka, a Choli, another Luo language. The Maasai and Gambe, Nuer, Fur, Tungu has two dialects, the Zage and T-Dage. That's the Nilo-Saharan. Now we're going to the Niger Congo A and B's. Okay, we're on Niger Congo. I had to for some research. I had to do a search online. All right, that congestion. All right, Niger Congo. The traditional branch and major language of Niger Congo. Now you know we on Wikipedia and they be talking about how these linguists they have these issues with this language or that dialect, or whatever. But irregardless, people themselves they tell each other that we are related. Alright, the Kordofanian languages spoken in southern central Sudan around the Nube Mountains. The Mandi spoken in West Africa include Bambara, the main language spoken in Mali, as well as Soniki, a language spoken mainly in Mali but also in Senegal and Mauritania. Now some of the linguists they have doubts about Mandi being Niger Congo, but the Ijo in Nigeria, Ijo and Difake, the Dogon spoken in Mali. They're saying here that the evidence Lincoln Doggone Night to Conquer is weak. Atlantic includes Wolof, spoken in Senegal, and the Fule, a language spoken across the Sahel. He said that the validity of Atlantic as a genetic grouping is controversial. Kru, spoken in West Africa, including BT, in Yahweh and Dade. Sinufo, spoken in Ivory Coast and Mali, with a geographic outlier in Ghana and includes Senari and Suyari. The Gerd languages, such as Moor and Burkina Faso, Adamawa languages such as Chambé and Cameroon, Ubangi languages such as Sango in the Central African Republic, the Kwe includes Akan spoken in Ghana, Volta Niger, which is West Benue Congo, including the GB languages spoken in Ghana, Togo, Benin, and Nigeria, of which Iwi is best known, and the Yoruba and Igbo language spoken in Nigeria. Then you have your East Benue Congo, which is Bantu, Swahili, Fang, Congo, Zulu, and many others. Now, going to the groupings of the languages, the Mandi branch, Bambare, Manike, Minde, Soniki, Dan, Jule, Mandika, Capelli, Atlantic branch, Fur, Dogon, Ijoid, Kru, your Gerd languages, which is more Masi, Sinufo, Sibare, Momare, and Subyari. Adamawa, Ubangi and Group, Lemuyi, Njibake, Sango, Zandi. Then your Kwe language, Akan, and Ashanti, Iwi, Bali, Fun, Gay, Dangmi, and Anyin. Then you have your West Benue Congo languages, which is Yoruba, Edo, Igbo, Yanuk, Adome. Then you have your Plateau, Kokor, Kenja, Kaji, Biron, and Tayrock. Kororofe, then your Cross River, Abibo, and Efik. Then you have your Southern Bantoid, Tia, Ecord, and then you have your Bantu. Now see the way they class and all this? They got it classed all the way up under Volta Congo. They got all that classified from the from the Kwe languages, all the way through the all that Igbo, all your Kwe languages, all your West Benue Congo languages, your North Volta group. All that is your Volta Congo language. It's your Volta Congo language. All right, we in the Bantu. BT, Fang, Lingale, Gikuyu, Kambe, Gusi, Miru, Sukume, Inyawisi, Swahili, Gogo, Katube, Luande, Mbudu, Congo, Yaka, Ganda, Chiga, Inyankore, Soga, Heye, Luyi, Nanda, Rwanda, Bundi, Hay, Lube, Tange, Sangi, Inyanja, Tambuke, Sine, Makawa, Yao, Ingulu, Makandi, Mbundu, Iriro, Shone, Indel, North Soto, and South Soto, Tiswane, then you have your South Indabili, then you have Loza, then you have your North Indabili, then you have your Zulu, your Jose, Tisange, Tiswe, Range, Chopa, Chopa, Dende. All those languages are Niger, Congo, A and B languages. Now, the other languages are your core, your sand languages. Those are your click consonant languages. And many of the core and the sand languages are either extinct or moribund. And sometimes through intermarriage. The Niger Congo also have the click consonants through intermarriage with the core and the sand. And you also have your Austronesian language, which is language found in Indonesia, Malaysia, and on the island of Madagascar. On the island of Madagascar, where the Austronesians are, there are Bantu people living on Madagascar that are Niger Congo. So now we're going to go to the East African slave trade. Then we're going to go to West African slave trade. Now, when we talk about slavery in Africa, we talk about the East African slave trade. We talk about in the Horn of Africa, the Horn of Africa being Somalia, Ethiopia, around that area. The Bantu people. Okay, it talks about okay, it says here the Somali and the farm Muslim sultanates, such as the medieval Adal Sultanate, through their ports also traded Zunj, Z-A-N-J, Bantu slaves that were captured from the hinterland. See, it says here slavery is practiced in what is modern Ethiopia, Eritrea was essentially domestic. Slaves thus served in the house of their master or mistress and were not employed to any significant extent for productive purpose. Slaves were thus regarded as second-class members of their own owner's family and were fed, clothed, and protected. Okay, it says, Bantu adult and children slaves were referred to in Jarir by their Somali masters, were purchased in the slave market, excluded to do work on plantation ground they toiled under the control of, and separated from their Somali patrons. In terms of legal consideration, Bantu slaves were devalued. Additionally, Somali social more strongly discouraged citizens looked down upon any kind of sexual contact with Bantu slaves. Freedom from these plantation slaves was also often acquired through escape. Okay, um, we're talking about the Great Lakes area. We're talking about Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and the neighboring some of the neighboring countries so close by. But mainly, we're talking about Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and the island of Zanzibar. And there was a slave trader named Tipu Tip who traded in slaves. He was a Swahili, and he was a slave trader. And he was also involved in the West African, the Atlantic slave trade, what we call it on the west coast of Africa. The Atlantic slave trade. Tipu Tip was involved in the Atlantic slave trade. And how was he? How was he involved? He was involved because he was on the east side of Africa, and when they had trade routes across the African continent, that's what he did. He used trade routes. And Tipu Tip died of malaria in 1991. But he was still alive after here in the Western, United States of America. The Proclamation of Emancipation had been signed, which freed the slaves. Well, the man who was shipping slaves over here was named Tipu Tip. And all those who are descended from the people who are your ancestors on the African continent in the Great Lakes area. When you live outside the African continent and something like this had happened, the elders know how to deal with this. But we know that the people living outside the African continent in East Asia, West Asia, living on the island of Madagascar, living on the islands in the Indian Ocean, living in and everywhere. And that slavery, they what they done, because slavery in the past, people are still suffering the effects of that even today. So we know that the East African slave trade was about saying about government versus the people, or the people versus the government, because I'm quite certain that bringing the judicial system under scrutiny is something that needs to be done. But the East African slave trade, you understand, it dealt with people being transported through the island named Zanzibar, and they were sent to India, to Central Asia, to West Asia. So now, and we want to make sure that all those people that are living outside the African Peninsula, the African continent, that they don't never try to say what they are. Bantu, Bantu, and people that live up here gonna say the same thing. That you Bantu, and and that the people, when they see us over in the Western Hemisphere, it's very clear who we are, because the people is over made that decision. And now let's go to the Atlantic slave trade. And while we talking about Tip Tip, Tip Tip, he married one of M. Siri. You remember M. Siri? He was an Yamwisi warrior. And he became a very successful trader for a moment. But then M. Siri was killed, and also his wife, she was beheaded. It's very important that we don't never forget Tip Tip. So let's go to the Atlantic slave trade. Okay, it said in the starting paragraph about the Atlantic, they said the Atlantic slave trade or transatlantic slave trade took place across the Atlantic Ocean from the 16th through the 19th century. The vast majority of those enslaved that were transported to the New World, meaning on the triangular trade route in its middle path, were West Africans from the central and western parts of the continent, sold by West Africans to Western European slave traders, or by direct European capture to the Americas. He said the Portuguese were the first to engage in the New World slave trade in the 16th century, and other Sumatran ship owners considered the slave as cargo to be transported to the Americas as quickly and cheaply as possible. Okay, it says here. Now listen to this. It said upon discovering, it says here, upon discovering new lands through their naval explorations, European colonizers soon began to migrate to and settle in lands outside their native continent off the coast of Africa. European migrants under the direction of the King of Castile invaded and colonized the Canary Islands during the 15th century, where they converted much of the land to the production of wine and sugar. Along with this, they also captured native Canary Islanders and Gonchis to use as slave boats on the island and across the Mediterranean. It says here, using the Canary Islands as a naval base, European, at the time primarily Portuguese traders, began to move their activities down the western coast of Africa, performing raids in which slaves would be captured to be later sold in the Mediterranean. Although initially successful in the adventure, it was not long before African naval forces were alerted to the new dangers, and the Portuguese raiding ships began to meet strong and effective resistance, with the crews of several of them being killed by African sailors whose boats were better equipped at traversing the West African coast and river system. It says here that by 1494, the Portuguese king had entered agreements with the rulers of several West African states that would allow traders trade between their respective people, enabling the Portuguese to tap into the well-developed commercial economy in Africa without engaging in hostilities. Peaceful trade became the rule all along the African coast, although there was some rare exception when acts of aggression led to violence. It said that I'm still on Wikipedia. I'm down here where it said the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. The Atlantic slave trade is customarily divided into two eras, known as the first and second Atlantic system. It said the first Atlantic system was the trade of enslaved Africans to primarily South American colonies of the Portuguese and Spanish empires. It accounted for slightly more than 3% of all Atlantic slave trade. It started on a significant scale in about 1502 and lasted until 1580, when Portugal was temporarily united with Spain. Let's see. It said while the Portuguese were directly involved in trading enslaved peoples, the Spanish Empire relied on the Asiento system, awarding merchants, mostly from other countries, the license to trade enslaved people to their colonies. During the first Atlantic system, most of these traders were Portuguese, giving them a near monopoly. During the era, some Dutch, English, and French traders also participated in the slave trade. After the Union, Portugal came under Spanish that prohibited it from directly engaging in slave trade as a carrier. It became a target for the traditional enemies of Spain, losing a large share of the trade to the Dutch, English, and French. So the second Atlantic system was the trade of enslaved Africans by mostly English, Portuguese, French, and Dutch traders. The main destination of this phase were the Caribbean colonies and Brazil. As European nations built up economically slave-dependent colonies in the New World, slightly more than 3% of the enslaved people exported from Africa were traded between 1450 and 1600 and 16% in the 17th century. Says here, it is estimated that more than half of the entire slave trade took place during the 18th century, with the British, Portuguese, and French being the main carriers of 9 out of 10 slaves abducted from Africa. By 1690, the English were shipping the most slaves from West Africa. They maintained this position during the 18th century, becoming the biggest shippers of slaves across the Atlantic. European colonists initially practiced systems of both bonded labor and Indian slavery, enslaving many of the natives of the New World for a variety of reasons. Africans replaced Native Americans as the main population of enslaved people in the Americas. In some cases, such as on some of the Caribbean islands, diseases such as smallpox and warfare eliminated the natives completely. In other cases, such as in South Carolina, Virginia, and New England, colonists found they needed alliances with native tribes. Together with the availability of enslaved Africans, and affordable price beginning in the early 18th century for these colonies, they banned Native American slavery. It says here about the triangular trade. Said the first side of the triangle was the export of goods from Europe to America, to Africa, from Europe to Africa. Said a number of African kings emerged and took part in the trade of enslaved people from 1440 to about 1833. For each captive, the African rulers would receive a variety of goods from Europe. These included guns, ammunition, and other factory-made goods. The second leg of the triangle exported enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas and the Caribbean islands. The third and final part of the triangle was the return of goods to Europe from the Americas. The goods were the products of slave labor, plantations, and included cotton, sugar, tobacco, molasses, and rum. Sir John Hopkins, considered the pioneer of British slave trade, was the first to run the triangular trade, making it profit at every stop. It said, where it said labor and slavery. The Atlantic slave trade was the result of, among other things, labor shortage. Itself in turn created by the desire of European colonists to exploit New World land and resources for capital profit. Native peoples were at first utilized as slave labor by Europeans until a large number died from overwork and old world diseases. Alternative sources of labor such as indentured servitude failed to provide a sufficient workforce. It says a vast amount of labor was needed to create and sustain plantations that require intensive labor to grow, harvest, and process prized tropical crops. Western Africa, part of which became known as the Slave Coast, and later Central Africa became the source for enslaved people to meet the demand for labor. All right, let me see here. It says here. Now, where it says European participation in the slave trade, I'm going to go down right this little paragraph now. It says, as of 1778, Thomas Kitchen estimated that Europeans were bringing an estimated 52,000 slaves to the Caribbean yearly. with the French bringing the most Africans to the French West Indies, 13,000 out of the yearly estimate. The Atlantic slave trade peaked in the last 2 decades of the 18th century. During and following the Congo Civil War, wars among tiny states along the Niger rivers, Igbo inhabited regions and the accompanying banditry also spiked in this period. Another reason for surplus supply of enslaved people was major warfare conducted by expanded states such as the King of Dahomey, the Oyo Empire, and the Asante Empire. Let's go down where it says slave market reason and participation. There were 8 principal areas used by Europeans to buy and ship slaves to the Western Hemisphere. The number of enslaved people sold to the New World varied throughout the slave trade. As for the distribution of slaves for reasons of activity, certain areas produced far more enslaved people than others. Between 1650 and 1900, 10.24 million enslaved Africans arrived in Americas following the regions arrived in America from the following regions in the following proportions. Senegal and Gambia, 4.8%. Upper Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, and Sierra Leone, 4.1%. Women Coast, Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire, 1.8%. Gold Coast, Ghana and Eastern Cote d'Ivoire, 10.4%. Bight of Benin, Togo, Benin, and Nigeria, west of the Niger Delta, 20.2%. The Bight of Biafra, Nigeria, east of the Niger Delta, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, and Gabon, 14.6%. West Central Africa, Republic of Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Angola, 39.4%. Southeastern Africa, Mozambique, and Madagascar, 4.7%. The ethnic groups. The different ethnic groups brought to the Americas closely correspond to the regions of heaviest activity in the slave trade. Over 45 distinct ethnic groups were taken to the Americas during the trade. Of the 45, the 10 most prominent, according to slave documentation of the era, they were: number 1, the Bakongo of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Angola; number 2, the Mandi of Upper Guinea; number 3, the GB speakers of Togo, Ghana, and Benin; and Jamina Iwi Fun. The Akan of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire; the Wolo of Senegal and the Gambia; the Igbo of southeastern Nigeria; the Mbundu of Angola, including both Mbundu and Ovimbundu; number 8, the Yoruba of southwestern Nigeria; the Chambay and the Makai of Mozambique. Where it says European competition, it said the trade of enslaved Africans in the Atlantic has its origins in the exploration of Portuguese mariners down the coast of West Africa in the 15th century. Before that, contact with African slave market was made to ransom Portuguese who had been captured by the intense North African barbary pirate attacks on Portuguese ships and coastal villages, frequently leaving them depopulated. The first Europeans to use enslaved Africans in the New World were the Spaniards, who sought auxiliaries for their conquest expeditions and laborers on islands such as Cuba and Hispaniola. It says here, the first Europeans to use enslaved Africans in the New World were the Spaniards, who sought auxiliaries for their conquest expeditions and laborers on islands such as Cuba and Hispaniola. Okay. The alarming decline in the native population has spawned the first royal laws protecting them. Laws of Burgers, 1512 13. The first enslaved Africans arrived in Hispaniola in 1501 after Portugal had succeeded in establishing sugar plantations in northern Brazil. Portuguese merchants on the West African coast began to supply enslaved Africans to the sugar planters. Okay. Now, where it says New World destinations, the first slaves to arrive as part of a labor force in the New World reached the island of Hispaniola, now Haiti and the Dominican Republic, in 1502. Cuba received its first 4 slaves in 1513. Jamaica received its first shipment of 4,000 slaves in 1518. Slave exports to Honduras and Guatemala started in 1526. The first enslaved Africans to reach what would become the United States arrived in January 1526 as part of a Spanish attempt to colonize South Carolina near Jamestown. By November, the 300 Spanish colonists were reduced to 100, and their ships were 100 to 70, and their slaves were 100 to 70. The enslaved people revolted and joined a nearby Native American tribe. The 17th century saw an increase in shipments, with Africans arriving in the English colony of Jamestown, Virginia, in 1619. These first kidnapped Africans were classed as indentured servants and freed after 7 years. Chattel slavery was codified in Virginia law in 1656, and in 1662 the colony adopted the principle of partis secuta ventrum, by which children of slave mothers were slaves, regardless of paternity. Irish immigrants by West children enslaved, more were slaves, and God of return. Irish immigrants took slaves to Montserrat in 1651 and 1655. Slaves were shipped to Belize. Distribution of slaves. Distribution of slaves. 1519, 1867. It said Portuguese America, 38.5%. British America minus North America, 18.4%. The Spanish Empire, 17.5%. French Americas, 13.6%. British North America. So British North America, 6.45%. English Americas, 3.25%. The Dutch West Indies, 2.0%. And the Danish West Indies, 0.3%. Okay, well, I'm looking at right now. looking at Harriet Tubman, make sure that we talk about escape from slavery. She escaped one time. She got caught. The first time she tried to escape. And that time, it said Tubman's brothers, they had second thought. Her two brothers escaped. They went back. Her two brothers went back to the plantation. They went back, so she turned back with them. The first time she escaped. She escaped again without her brothers. Okay, she made it to Pennsylvania. Okay, it says but she escaped from Maryland. We know she escaped from Maryland. Then she made it to Pennsylvania. Eventually she started living in Okay. Then she started going to Auburn, New York. When you talk about slavery in Canada, includes both slavery as practiced by the First Nations in land that now comprises Canada before European colonization, as well as slavery under European colonization, the latter of which existed until 1833, when slavery was officially abolished. It says some slaves were of African descent, but most were Aboriginal. A small number of African slaves were forcibly brought as chattel by Europeans to New France, Acadia, and the later British North America during the 17th century. Said those in Canada came from the American colonies, as no shiploads of human chattel came to Canada directly from Africa. The number of slaves in New France is believed to be in the hundreds. They were house servants and farm workers. There were no large-scale plantations in Canada, and therefore no large-scale plantation slave workforce of the sort that existed in most European colonies in the southerly Americas, from Virginia to the West Indies to Brazil. Because early Canada's role in the transatlantic slave trade was so minor, the history of slavery in Canada is often overshadowed by the more tumultuous slavery practiced elsewhere in America, mostly infamously in the American South and the colonial Caribbean. says that this we on Wikipedia, and we're talking about slavery in Canada, where it says under British rule, the Sierra Leone Company was established to relocate groups of formerly enslaved Africans, nearly 1,200 black Nova Scotians, most of whom had escaped enslavement in the United States. Given the coastal environment of Nova Scotia, many had died from the harsh winters there. They established a settlement in the existing colony in Sierra Leone, already established a home to poor blacks of London at Freetown in 1792. Many other black poor were African Americans who had been promised their freedom for joining the British Army during the American Revolution, but also included other African and Asian inhabitants of London. The Freetown settlement was joined, particularly after 1834, by other groups of freed Africans and became the first African American haven for formerly enslaved Africans. Today, there are 4 remaining slave cemeteries in Canada: St. Armand, Quebec; Sherburne, Nova Scotia; and Priceville and Dresden in Ontario. Around the time of the Emancipation, the Underground Railroad network was established in the United States, particularly Ohio, where slaves were crossing to the northern states over the Ohio River en route to various settlements and towns in Upper Canada, known as Canada West, from 1841 to 1867. Now, Ontario, this is Canada's only relationship to slavery, generally known to the public or acknowledged by the Canadian government. So when we deal with slavery in Canada, a lot of the slaves that escaped slavery here in the United States of America escaped slavery from here and traveled all the way through via the Underground Railroad and made it all the way up to Canada. But there was no slave ships. There were no slave ships leaving Africa coming to Canada. The slaves that came, people, escaped slaves came to Canada, came from the United States of America. So those West Africans that were taken from West Africa, and brought to Jamestown, Virginia, and all those ports, to the 13 colonies, and then later on some other states, after 1776, after the revolution with the British, then some more states started growing into the United States, growing more states. Slavery continued, but then they had the Mason-Dixon line, before the Civil War. And they had this line, the Mason-Dixon line, that slavery would not go, past the Mason-Dixon line. For some of the northern states, they didn't have slavery in the north, but had slavery in the south. That's what the Mason-Dixon line. So the slaves would escape slavery in these states, and then escape to the north, and then end up in Canada. So those people who were brought here were West Africans. what I was looking at is when you talk about slavery in Angola and the slave trade, Atlantic slave trade. You can find out a lot of information about the slave trade by going to slavery in Angola. There's one source of information on Wikipedia. Go to slavery in Angola. Okay. Now, what I was reading is slavery in Haiti, and that'll give you some more information about the shipping lane, Atlantic slave trade. Look up slavery in Haiti. Then you can look up slavery in Dominican Republic, and it'll all tell you about the slavery in his reading. I'm looking at the time. You can go on, excuse me, congestion. You can go online and you can do research. Cause we're gonna come back next week and we're gonna continue after talking, discussion on African traditional religion, West African traditional religion, and we're gonna continue to emphasize slavery, Arab slave trade, Arab slave trade, East African slave trade, and the Atlantic slave trade, because we need to make sure we determine the East African slave trade, the people who being traded with the Bantu and East African slave trade, and including in the Horn of Africa, Bantu women being used for sex slaves and things of this nature, and Bantu uh, people being sold from the Great Lakes to Saudi Arabian Peninsula and West Asia, uh, Central Asia, South Asia, uh, East and Far East Asia. And then we had the Atlantic or Northwest, the Atlantic slave trade in the west coast of Africa and to the Western Hemisphere. And very important, we need to determine West African descendancy and Bantu descendancy. And we're gonna continue. We're gonna continue this information on the next video. But until then, my name is Eric D. Johnson, also known as BrightShine. I live in the city of Memphis, the state of Tennessee, and the county of Sheriff. I want to thank all my fans, my support for all your continued encouragement and support. And I'm working on my legal action against One Sound Studio and against Wicked Film, this Luga dude. Talking about they stole my money. Talking about they stole some money, man. Ain't nobody got away with doing that. I'm working on that. But I'm also, all my fans, my supporters also know I'm working on my, I'll continue to work on my entertainment, my musical interest. So until my next video, take care of yourself. I wish each and every one of you the very best. And Happy New Year.